wanted to thank everyone for being here. My name is Antony Bugg-Levine. I'm the CEO of the Nonprofit Finance Fund. I'm also the chairman of the Global Impact Investing Network. Hopefully some of you have heard about both of those organizations. If not, I'm more than happy afterwards to talk about them and the work they do. And just wanted to thank you all for being here in a bunker with no windows on a beautiful fall afternoon. I'm always incredibly excited and humbled when I'm with a group of people who want to spend a day like this talking about impact investing. It's something that myself and my staff do, but we know that there are not a lot of people like us. The one thing we all have in common is that when we go home for Thanksgiving, none of us can explain to our families what we do for a living. So it's nice to be in a room where hopefully at least most of you, if not understand what we do, are at least excited to hear more about it. So this session is really looking at the whole question of how can impact investment be one tool that can help us realize the ambitions you've been talking about within this conference, and that is a world in which the economy and our societies are able to mobilize and engage many more people than our traditional market systems have in their own upliftment and create a market economy and a social sector that it can engage many more people around the world. That's the overall theme, and rather than talking about it theoretically, what we're going to do in this session is enable you all to be actual impact investors for an hour and answer the question of whether you would recommend making an investment in an agricultural venture in East Africa that Jessica from the Acumen Fund will describe, whose purpose is very much to do what this conference is about, and that is create a mechanism by which many more people in that particular region of the world can get the products and services they need in order to be more productively engaged with the economy and ultimately empower and uplift their own communities. So that's the overarching theme for today, and I'm just going to start for a few minutes and get a sense of where you all are in terms of understanding and thinking about impact investing. So first of all, how many of you have heard of impact investments? That's awesome. We came up with that phrase about 6 years ago, and just a little story. When I first came to Columbia Business School, I pitched the social enterprise program on the idea of a course on impact investing, and they told me, well, no one really knows what you're talking about. What they really want to do is understand how business can be relevant for development. So for about 5 years, I've been teaching a course on business innovation and international development. Not this year or last year, for those of you who wonder why you've never seen me. I'm a little busy with my day job. But there's now, as some of you know, an oversubscribed course on impact investing at Columbia Business School. Most major business schools are now embracing this topic, and the fact that that many hands went up is really a remarkable victory. You guys have the luxury of taking for granted the fact that you can be coming to a place like this and a conference like this and have this discussion. You should not take that for granted. There are a lot of people who've been sweating as pioneers for years and years, longer than myself, including the founder of the Acumen Fund and the team there. The organization I work for, which is a domestic impact investor in the US, has been doing it for 30 years. It's been a much lonelier journey for the first part of that, and it's incredibly exciting for all of us that you guys can all be here and already be this engaged at this point in your careers. So we're not going to get into what impact investing is, other than to say that the basic theme is how can we productively use for-profit investment to complement government and philanthropy in addressing the social issues we care about. And that's the theme of today. About 10 years ago, there was a lot of excitement about this simmering around. About 5 years ago, it started infiltrating into places like business schools and elsewhere. And I think what's happened in the last 3 years is a real rapid evolution from very exciting articulation of why this is theoretically exciting. So this idea that a for-profit investment can be a morally legitimate and economically effective way to solve a social problem was really beautiful theoretically, and people got excited and organized and created courses and papers. Then we had a second phase, for about 5 years, where lots of people announced new funds. So the Acumen Fund was launched about 15 years ago, came up with a new for-profit impact investing component of what they do about 7 years ago. The IGNIA Fund in Mexico, if anyone's heard of them, amazing fund that launched about 5 years ago. We even this week had an announcement from JP Morgan that they're working with the Gates Foundation on a $100 million impact investing fund focused on public health. So kind of the trajectory was, first let's get excited about the theory. And it sounds really beautiful when you describe it theoretically. Then let's have these announcements like, wow, we're actually doing something, we're moving forward. But the theme for today is the third phase, and that is, let's not learn from how beautiful the theory is or how exciting the announcements are. Let's actually learn from what happens when we really do the deals themselves. And what we're learning now that more people are out there trying to make impact investing work, and in many cases making them work, and in many cases learning from when they don't work, is that the theory is beautiful and the reality is much messier, but also ultimately much more powerful. And we don't have to debate who has the more beautifully articulated theory anymore, because we have many, many more people around the world who are actually making deals happen and learning from those deals about how messy things are. So what we're going to do today in about an hour is have you guys be part of that experience of taking a specific deal that Acumen was involved in and really understanding how the theory and the idea that a for-profit investment can both generate financial return as well as achieve the social goals we care about goes from the beauty in the abstract to the reality on the ground. And so I want to turn it over to Jessica from Acumen, who has prepared a case study from a deal they did that she'll talk more about. She'll introduce the case study and talk a little bit more about the Acumen Fund. Then we're going to be asking you, sitting where you are in small groups, to go through this case as if you were investment officers. And we'll take about 15 minutes at the end to come back and share what you've learned as well as additional questions you might have. So, Jessica.
Thanks, Antony. Talking about being humble, it's not every day that you get introduced by Antony Bugg-Levine, which is very cool. So my name is Jessica. I work at Acumen, where I'm an innovation associate, which means I get to work on cool new ideas most of the day. And I can talk a little bit more about that further on in the presentation. But just to get a sense of the audience, how many people here have heard of Acumen before or are familiar? How many people are familiar with Acumen's patient capital investing model? A little bit? Okay. So I'm just going to go over a little bit about our approach in the sphere of impact investing, and then put you guys in the shoes of our portfolio managers and present an opportunity to you. So basically at Acumen, we're trying to change the way the world tackles poverty by investing in companies, leaders, and ideas. Since we were founded in 2001, and we started out investing, and you probably know us best as Acumen Fund. But since then, we have expanded not only into investing, but also running leadership programs. So we realized that just investing in companies alone wasn't going to make a dent in poverty. So we started building programs around training leaders that are going to be the lead architects for this sector. And then from there, we also have 23 volunteer organized chapters around the world that build awareness, fundraise, and also build just a network around this social enterprise space that I actually started out with here in New York before joining Acumen about a year ago. And then now the actual program I'm working on is now we have online courses, so taking our leadership training and putting it online. So that's the work that I do. But today I'm going to be mainly focusing on the investing, because that's what you guys came here to hear about. So we raise charitable donations, philanthropic donations, to invest in for-profit business models that are delivering critical goods and services to the poor. And since 2001, we've invested $88 million in 80 companies, and they've reached 115 million lives and have created or supported about 100 or 58K in jobs. And so we work in 5 different regions, mostly in East Africa, West Africa, India, Pakistan, and now just opened an office in Latin America. And our investments are looking to make access to critical goods and services in these 6 different sectors. So we have portfolios built around agricultural, energy, education, health, housing, and water. And so what makes an investment to us, or an Acumen investment, when we're looking at opportunities? First and foremost, potential for large-scale social impact. So is this an innovation that could possibly scale to reach 1 million customers? Is the team or entrepreneur deeply committed to serving low-income populations? Are they willing to go the course and slug it through the hard times to be able to reach those individuals? And also, is there a potential to be financially self-sustaining? It doesn't have to be profitable at the moment that we invest, but we need to understand what building blocks need to be put into place so that it can reach profitability and be financially sustainable. And then potential game changers, and by this we need new models to delivering goods or services or fighting different problems around poverty. And that could be either scaled across the world or replicated in different geographies. So I've been throwing this term around, patient capital. This is a term that our founder, Jacqueline Novogratz, coined for our model or our approach to impact investing. And so it basically tries to bring together the best of charity and the best of markets for long-term social impact. And so, as I said, we receive charitable donations, and then we invest equity or debt into for-profit companies. And then they use that hopefully to scale along with a lot of management support. And unlike other traditional venture capital funds where you'll see when they look to exit or the capital is returned and they return it back to their investors, we recycle it back into our fund so it can be invested in another opportunity. And so where you see traditional VCs, venture capital firms or investors looking at a 2 to 5 year time horizon, the companies we're working with are working in really tough places and usually on innovative models that have never been tried before with people that have usually never been considered customers before. So it takes a lot longer. So the patient capital is patient in that sense that it gives time and flexibility and is also coupled with usually intensive management assistance, all focused on the goal of maximizing social impact. That's coming out. So that slide's not coming out right. But so just to give you a sense of where Acumen plays, we found there's the big gap, which we call the pioneer gap. That is between when you're moving from idea to actually scaling. There's a period where you really have to test out your solution, your sales and distribution models, and whether you actually have a real sustainable model. And so we play in this kind of pioneer gap place where we really think philanthropic capital is needed. And then usually a lot of the investors in the impact investing space are looking for getting in at the scaling up phase. So just to talk about one of our investments to make this a little more tangible. D-Light Design is a solar lantern company that we invested in 2008 when they really just had a prototype and they were probably 1 or 2 pilots under their belt. And we've been following them for quite a few years. We've been helping to invest in Series A and Series B and supporting them in the impact they've been able to reach. But since then, they have actually reached to 40 different countries, and they're also have impacted 20 million lives. And this has really been sort of one of our success stories or game changers because they've been able to scale so quickly and also been really life-changing for people, women and children, being able to study late, work later, shopkeepers keep their stores open later. And so this is an example of how we kind of follow them through that validate, prepare, and then scaling to the size that they are today. Another company is Zakitsa Healthcare. They actually came to Acumen when there was no reliable emergency transportation services in Mumbai, and we thought that was not acceptable. And today, they are one of the largest ambulance companies in Asia, operating 1,000 ambulances, and they've made actually, or they've received 1.7 million calls. They've been able to expand into 6 different states, and they've really changed sort of the fabric of communities or low-income communities where they now are confident or are confident that there's a service that they can call and rely on when there's an emergency. So it really has changed their outlook or value on life. So instead of talking a little anymore, I'm going to kind of turn this session over to you guys so that you can be in the investor's chair and run a very expedited investment committee here. And so you can guys look at an opportunity with this sort of patient capital lens. So we're looking at an agricultural opportunity in West Africa, in Kenya to be exact. And so the problem that we're looking at here is that about 24 million Kenyans work in agriculture, and I think 17 million of those are smallholder farmers. So the smallholder farmers are the farmers with 2 hectares or 5 acres or less. And most of them are farming maize, which represents a primary source of food for rural Kenyans. And most of their, they usually don't have much access to agricultural technology like hybrid seeds or quality inputs. And they usually use farm-safe seeds from the previous season that they harvest, which usually suffers from just irregular or lower yields. And then, just to give you a little perspective of the yields, in 2007, the yield in Kenya, or average yield, was 2 metric tons per hectare. That global average was 5 metric tons, and in Iowa, it was 10. So pretty big difference there. An average household, I think, consumes 270 kg of maize, which leaves them just a little bit left over to sell in the market for more income or additional income. So with that in mind, in 2009, Acumen was approached by Salim Ismail, an entrepreneur in Kenya. And he has a company that makes hybrid seeds. He also researches and develops these hybrid seeds that he says is 2 to 3 times more productive than its competitors. And he's looking for capital because he wants to increase production and sales by 4 times and reach 850,000 smallholder farmers over the next 8 or 5 years. And he says the capital would be used to purchase 600 hectares of land to cultivate the seed, to expand his storage facilities, and also to aid in the breeding and certification process of these seeds. So going back and putting on your patient capital lens, let's just for a few minutes brainstorm what additional information would you want to know about this opportunity. You guys can call it out or you can raise your hand. We can make this a little more interactive. Yep. Go ahead.
What's the efficacy of the seeds?
Yeah, so is it actually 2 to 3 times more yield?
I want to know who this guy is, what he's done in the past, and who is his team that's going to execute this.
Right, that's great. Right back there. Mm-hmm.
I want to know more about the legal landscape of land ownership and the power limits and aim for the government.
Right, regulatory environment. You've had a hand up.
Would the land be purchased only in one lot or separate?
Okay. Go ahead.
Do the farmers using the seeds actually have the capacity to use the new larger crops and clear out some of that food?
So like willingness to pay for the seeds or ability to actually harvest it? Okay. You had your hand up down here.
Competition? I didn't know if you said anything about competition. They already exist other products.
We don't know anything about existing products yet.
How are you interested in knowing that he's involved in some of the small farmers and like educating them on like kind of or involving them in the process, or like is he just giving them stuff, or is he giving them opportunities to learn and kind of about what he's actually doing to produce?
So is there any training or capacity building that comes with the seeds?
Think about infrastructure with the clients that we're trying to pursue, so that they have the capacity to take on this.
Right. Do they have markets to sell to, even if they have good harvest?
Start on the current price of maize in Kenya and
Why?
consider to see if you want to sell maize, how much we sell for.
Okay.
Try to do that one. So what was it question on the seed?
Price of maize.
How much it costs for them to actually produce it right now, like budgets,
So like production production costs for this amount? Okay.
I would like to know who's the team budget, so it's at home, basically.
It's important, right? Go ahead.
If there are any environmental implications.
Of introducing hybrid seeds to these farmers, yeah.
Will the seeds work the same under the brand, and do they need to be combined with a form of fertilizer?
Yep, that's a good point.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Fluctuation in consumption of maize in the target market.
Essentially looking at ways of increasing the yield in a fluctuated grapevine to even more, if there's any work done on having the expired real seed.
To increase it even more, make it even a better seed. Okay. You were raising your hand?
I think maybe it ties into the pricing, will it be subsidized?
Does it need to be subsidized? Yeah. Is there support for that?
How does the nutritional makeup of this new mice compare to the traditional one and its interaction with the other foods that they eat to supplement that, like meat?
Right. That's very interesting. You got it?
What sort of controls are going to be in place for making sure that the money gets spent on the right things?
Financial controls and systems, very important. So say you write all that stuff up in your due diligence email and you send that back to Celine. And you guys get this back. We're going to be handing out an info sheet. There's a front and a back portion of it. I'll give you guys about 10 minutes to take a look at it. While looking through it, just think of what risks you see with this opportunity and ways in which you would try to mitigate those risks. And then we'll come back and talk about that. So, what are some risks that you see with the information that you've got? Go ahead.
We can't hear you up here.
Yeah, did you? Hey. So that was, you said the competitor or the state company is selling at a lower cost, right? And then farmers already have seeds, so why are they going to adopt these? So farmer adoption is a risk. Okay.
If you introduce this new seed to compete with the Kenya Seed Company, is that going to put other Kenyans out of jobs who work for that company?
Okay.
For other farmers?
So are we going to put people out of work? There's a social impact lens there. Go ahead.
Just needing more information about the profile of your customers who are willing to pay, like a higher premium for your ad. So I'm just concerned that the margin is increasing, and since they only have a small amount of market share, I think it's possible. And also, price will deviate from commodities. So
the margin projections were pretty ambitious when they came to us.
And also to tell by deviation in the market.
So guys, follow up on that point. So if you believe that a farmer who buys this product is going to make a multiple in production, even though the margins are small, they're going to make more revenue, so why wouldn't they be able to pay a higher cost? Why is that a particular challenge in this setting, which might not be the case elsewhere? It's just, I don't know what his thoughts on.
Well, access to credit up front, because their upfront costs are higher.
Yeah, so during that, the customers don't have access to credit, and the fact that in a year they're going to make more money than it costs the seeds doesn't help. And we're not, this company is not in the credit business, they're in the seed business. So you need that infrastructure to be in place for your customers to be able to realize the benefits, even if they're real.
You had your hand up for a while.
How does Western seeds compare to Kenyan seeds?
Right. What's their yield potential versus the competitors?
So Harvard says that they would nominate local agents to
So the part where it says that they would nominate local agents to collect orders, I was wondering if that would open up the possibility of cronyism or corruption and potential ethnic or gender discrimination in terms of who gets how many seeds.
Possibly.
I think their growth projections are really, to double from the first year to the second year seems very optimistic, and especially like you have a culture in this that the farmers reuse their seeds from the prior year. So I think those two things together, I would worry about those sales projections.
So Celine came back and said that we're going to increase our capacity, our production capacity, and get efficiencies on the cost side. What other risks would there be still in that same sort of lens?
In this scenario? Well, I think that, you don't know how even, like you have risk-averse farmers, so are they going to come back?
Yeah. So that's repeat customer, that's all under the header of farmer adoption, right. Willingness to buy.
We don't actually know the timeline and probability of success of developing the seed. Making a seed that's 3 times more productive in 1 year is really different than making one that's 2 times more productive in 4 or 5 years.
I think right now he does have the seeds, but also he's looking for capital to do additional research on that. Sorry, you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, it was around that. The seeds were still have to be developed, so it's a promise instead of a product. But you're saying that the product is there now, and it has already proven that it 2-3 times.
According to them, we don't have any third-party studies yet. Back there?
I was wondering, I know they're saying it's 2 to 3 times more productive, but if they're contracting them to make a certain amount of maize, are the actual farmers going to benefit from it? Like, are they going to be contracted to make a certain amount, so they're still only taking back that 270 every year, or are they actually going to benefit from this?
The farmers in this case aren't being contracted to actually grow the maize.
Right.
So Western Seed will buy land, purchase land, and grow maize and their hybrid maize basically, and then the seeds from that are then sold to the farmers. But they're not contracting the farmers. Are you saying they might have the hybrid seed, but do they have a market to sell it to? So they could be contracted by a corn chip firm or something that needs maize. I don't know.
I was wondering about political risk. If they're going up against a bigger company, is that bigger company that they're going up against somehow tied in with local politicians? Will they have trouble getting approvals? Will obstacles appear in their way that have nothing to do with fair competition?
Yes, that's a very big risk.
And in this case, that would be the case anyway, but who owns the company that is the incumbent?
The government, right?
Yeah. So we'll get into that.
In that same vein, what are some other risks, regulatory risks, or geographical risks that might be there?
If the government suddenly decides that it wants to protect this monopoly, it could say that hybrid seeds are not accepted in Kenya, which they
Yeah, they could probably do that.
I was curious about what the yield is on. I was curious about what the yield is on the seeds that they saved them. So there are 3. It says that it's 3 times as much like the seeds right now. But if they save the seeds of the offspring, what's the yield on that? Because that would affect whether or not they may want to go back and purchase more seeds. If it's still the same, then they would really have no incentive to go back. But if the yield goes down substantially, or, I doubt they're going to use Terminator technology like Monsanto, but it could affect whether or not they go back.
So if they don't see the yield increases that the company is claiming?
No, after they use it, yeah. Right, and then they have those plants have offspring. What is the yield of that offspring? Because if most of the farmers, you said they're growing it on their land. So they wouldn't be, the farmers, are they growing it on in their private little plots?
Yeah, they're using the Western seeds on their plots.
Right. So yeah, depending on what the yield is for the next generations, would affect whether or not farmers have an incentive to return to purchase new seeds.
So like, what's the life cycle of the benefits of these higher yielding seeds? Like, is it 3 years, 4 years they have to go back, or 10? That wouldn't be very good.
Can I just push you on that though? You said, I assume they won't use terminated technology like Monsanto. I saw a bunch of people with their like evil Monsanto faces on. What if the economics of this business required them to put that technology in? That in fact they needed to put terminated seeds. So the idea being that after you plant it, you grow it, you get these great yields. It does not produce offspring next season, so you've got to go back to Western seed. I mean, for how many of you would that be a good thing because it makes the business more viable, versus a bad thing because it sounds like we're replicating the behavioral evil Monsanto. But if that business still allows the farmers to pay less for the seeds and their gains in productivity, is that necessarily a bad thing?
Well, I know that in Kenya, when Monsanto has tried to give their seeds that are genetically engineered or that may have this technology, it was actually refused by the director of agriculture because they didn't want to become dependent on a foreign company in order to produce food when most of their farmers were dependent. And also they said it could create a monopoly where they could just raise the price, and because they didn't have any safe seed, they really wouldn't have any choice but to accept whatever price that was determined. So in terms of, that might not be the case because there's other seed producers, but it's a concern.
But it's something to think about. So is it somehow morally better that this is a Kenyan-owned company whose founder is fourth generation Kenyan versus a foreign company if the practice is the same? Don't answer that, but just something to think about.
Jessica.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, one concern that I would have is it says that the majority of the revenues come from the sale of the maize seeds, but also other seed products and byproducts. So if you look at the financials, I would love to see segmented financials to know what portion of that revenue is actually attributed to the seed in question versus other products.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Thank you. I'd be curious to know specifically about the capital structure of the company that you're making the investment to, particularly because of these existing investors. So are there specifics about the capital structure that could be dangerous? And separately, as a family business, I'd want to look at any sort of related party agreements that perhaps could, make fraud easier.
You've done investing before, huh?
I'm a due diligence
professional. Okay, yes. I want to know all about the related parties. How about, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, going off of 2 points, one, the political risks, and also who has access to, hi, who has access to capital, and to repeat, the political risk. From the international development point of view, which is where I come from, is this going to increase conflict between the tribes in rural Kenya? Because one of my closest friends and roommate is Kikuyu, who has capital to certain areas, but they're also in conflict with other tribes because they do have this access.
So I'm just going to write that down. It's a sort of specific point, but I think the broader point is we've been talking a lot about the impact this has on economic growth. So will farmer incomes go up? And what I'm hearing you say is, from a social impact perspective, it actually matters that you answer the question not just will incomes go up, but who will get those incomes. And at one level, you said it's about different tribes. In other contexts, it could be about one region of the country versus the other. And something I haven't heard anyone say, which is really important, is does this not only put money, but put economic power within the family into the hands of women or men? Because the social impact of that incremental dollar in someone's hands is deeply proven to it makes a huge difference if that incremental dollar goes to the man or the woman. So just a quick story on that. When I was in Kenya running TechnoServe, we did a bunch of work helping dairy farmers get better incomes. And if you just looked at the income, it was a great project. But what it did was it made dairy farming so lucrative that it went from being women's work to something the men took over. So while the family's income went up, the small amount of income that dairy used to produce that women were controlling went down. Because now that great amount of income was in the hands of men who now took that seriously as a commercial enterprise. It makes a big difference on long-term social impact, not just about the dollars you put in people's hands, but who in the family has control of those dollars.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with looking at what that distribution channel is going to look like, and who are you partnering with, who are they selling to, and understanding your customers or the farmers that you're actually reaching. There's a comment back here. Sorry, I'm making you run around, Marty. Really hard. I can hear you.
It's connected with what he was saying about distribution. I mean, in some way, I mean, when you're trying to scale up your business, that means that you need to make some kind of investment in transportation. And you know, in this aspect, we are using this model just assuming that the farmers are going to transport the seed or the product, I don't know how. So how you're going to really make the business profitable at the moment to scale up, sorry about my English, but to make it grande. So in a way, I'm just trying to connect how you can connect making a business grow and at the same time convey the traditional way of making that product get into new markets. But those new markets are not regulated by the global economy. And not even is regulated by the state, because these are rural areas that are not necessarily connected to the state in the capital. So how you make that farmer be a richer man or a richer woman, but at the same time facilitate the way of cooperating with other tribes or other families that are far away from the production center. So that's some kind of like a combination of how to think global, but you don't take care of the local dynamic that is going on. And it's connected with what yeah, he was making sense. So in some way, it's I was thinking, and you know, in some way, exchanging with her that sort of contradiction,
it's
because
a valid point and a challenge too, because you're only they're providing one part of the solution, one part of the agriculture chain. But if the farmers don't have a market to sell to or a way to get there, then the impact is sort of obsolete. And you definitely have experience with that and in building out companies at that exact point.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very good point, and I've written, what I said here is the existence of supportive infrastructure, that we see a lot of investments fail and social programs fail when agriculturists get really excited about a new seed variety and they run all these models and they say we're going to triple your income, and then they actually triple production, but there's no way to get that income to markets, because the people who are thinking about the seeds aren't the same people who are thinking about the markets, who aren't the same people thinking about the roads, who aren't thinking about credit. How many of you heard about the Millennium Villages program that Columbia professor Jeffrey Sachs helps to run? His first year operating in Western Kenya, actually the same area where this investment would be taking place, he made a massive infusion of new seeds along with irrigation and fertilizer to smallholder farmers. Exceeded the goals, and it wasn't doubling, it was tripling 5 times, almost 10 times the production. When the harvest came, he got a panicked call from the guys out in Western Kenya saying, the harvest is about to come, and we have no storage facilities. Because for at least a generation, there has been no surplus in that part of Kenya. It is such a poor area. And so when there was no storage facilities, a bunch of traders came from the city and showed up at the farms and said, we will pay you pennies on the dollar of what that is worth. And there was sort of a lot of outrage, but that's the market. And that's an example of what happens when you think about one part, which is let's get the production up, but you don't put in place those other infrastructures. And so what I said here is it's the existence of supporting infrastructure, not just roads and storage. Credit, we talked about that earlier. Are there credit markets is a big part of it. When Google created Google, they didn't have to create the internet. If you want to get a seed company successful in Kenya, you have to do the equivalent. You're not going to be able to just be in the seed business. you're going to have to be doing every other one of these businesses that makes a value chain work. And if you're not thinking about that in not only your economics of your business, but how you're going to lead it, you'll hit one of these obstacles the way that that program did in Western Canada.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think at Acumen and the sector in general, we're trying to get smarter at what interventions work where and what is the ecosystem that's needed to make it all actually work instead of just doing sort of projects here and there. So building that into your portfolio sector kind of strategies and helping to understand where your dollar can make the most impact in creating that ecosystem or supporting it. So you might not always be investing in the sexiest kind of thing, but taking that ecosystem approach. You had a comment?
Well, I wondered, does the government play a role?
Does the government play a role in doing that infrastructure because you're setting up a potential marketplace for other businesses to use that? Is that something that...
Yes and no. I mean, at Acumen, we try not to deal with the government if we don't have to. There are instances where it's important to kind of talk to government people, but Acumen is investing in these areas because the government hasn't delivered on these just basic goods and services. So try not to really rely on them, but that's a risk. So we have time for questions at the end. Thinking about all the risks that you listed out, as investors, we don't just want to list out all the risks because it looks really bad, right? What are some mitigation strategies or ways you could sort of mitigate the risk to get comfortable about some of these possible challenges? Since you are investing in new things, innovative things, you can't really know what is going to happen exactly. Go ahead.
Is there a way to have like a Netflix trial run of this seed, for example? Is there a way to have like just like a trial of the seed, basically, so that they not the whole crop is this new stuff, but they can see what the value add is to their farm in all phases of the process. So yeah, the residual seeds, like my guy back there was talking about, and also
So I mean, you had the slide about the Pioneer Gap.
Right.
So what are the 4 phases of Pioneer Gap? And the 4 phases of getting something to scale, what is it?
Idea, validate, test, validate, and then scale.
Yeah, so have the idea, test, validate, and scale. What you just said is, can you spend more time testing and validating before you get to scale? That is, and the fact that that's going to cost money and take time is why the Pioneer Gap exists, because mainstream investors are not willing to take that time. And it's why you talked about Acumen's theme around patient capital. But what you're proposing is going to take time, and it's going to lower the investment return because we'll be spending more time in our investors' money as they lose money to test and validate. But it does reduce the risk in the long term.
That's on the farmer's end too. So you want like all first-time customers to have free harvest to try it out.
Well, lower cost.
Okay, so like a discount. Okay.
Identifying not just local demand for these seeds, but also identifying not just local demand for these seeds, but also potentially exporting them to markets where there might be a greater need or they're just better suited to certain other markets. And secondly, also in terms of the pricing, it's not entirely clear that in terms of distribution, once it's sold to the distributors and wholesalers, what's the price point from there on. So kind of making the pricing more clear in that regard.
So just on international markets, the international maize markets are incredibly distorted by some pretty evil policies of Western governments to subsidize their own farmers, which makes those international markets incredibly hard for these kinds of farmers to participate in. In recent years, there's been some really interesting developments around how food aid is being procured. So this might sound crazy to you, but most food that's given as aid in East Africa, and unfortunately there's pretty reliably going to be either a famine or something else going on in East Africa that creates displacement of people and the need for food aid. Until very recently, that was all imported from Western governments as part of a quid pro quo that Western governments said, we will donate food, but only if it helps to subsidize our farmers. There was a very visionary leader of the World Food Program in the last decade who has changed that so that now there's an attempt being made to make the distribution of donor food in this region be supportive of the supply chain. So there is actually a movement now to buy maize and other inputs from local farmers. The challenge has been to balance the need to have reliable access to food when famines strike against the need to create this kind of market, and the challenge being that Western farmers can deliver you reliably 20,000 tons of maize to a port on a schedule, whereas we've got to build up a whole system to make it work. So I'd say generally the idea that we can export our way out of this is not something that a lot of African smaller farmers or others are able to do, partly because our markets are so distorted. But diversification of customer base is really important.
Again, coming from the international development side and also having worked with USAID projects that do fail quite miserably because of a lack of contextual research. And so doing your interviews, researching if there's parallel universes that are, so other efforts being that are trying to do the same thing, working with, partnering with as many people as possible. And just really doing your contextual research and not making policies from your air-conditioned office in the Western world. That's
Right.
really simple, sorry.
No, I mean, it's true. We look for people that are filling a need and building their products or services from the customer's perspective. So these farmers, in this case.
I'm wondering if you foresee Acumen, the way the chart you drew at the beginning showed Acumen doing a lot of diverse kinds of investments over time. And I wonder if you see a reconsolidation or focusing as a later stage as a result of this. Because I know I've worked in a sectoral intervention before where we just did loans in a healthcare space, for example, and therefore knew an industry, knew a region, and could really dig in. I've seen other people do things like that. And I'm wondering if you could say, well, maybe there's some naivete in trying all these things. And just like any investment fund that has a focus might be headed that way. Does that make any sense? Is that
So we've been pretty focused geographically for the first 10 years. It was strictly East Africa, Pakistan, and India. The portfolio or areas we've invested has grown, sort of as incubating new innovations and ideas. And I think we're at the point where we can start learning from those failures or successes and try to get more strategic about the portfolios and like the sectors within those basically larger sectors and where we should be, where our capital works the most. I wouldn't say, I think we'll keep the same sort of 6 portfolios, but within them be a bit more strategic and have like very clear investment thesis around what works, what doesn't.
10 more minutes.
Okay, so I know you guys have a lot to say, but this is sort of, the discussion is sort of simulating the discussion you would have as the investment committee, but we also don't make our investment decisions within 1 hour. It's usually coupled with getting on the ground, talking to potential customers, farmers, talking to all of Salim's staff, management committee, possible distribution partners, etc. But since this is simulated, I think we're going to go around and give me a raise of hands if you would be willing to invest in this opportunity.
And before you do that, so I want to make this one slight change. You're investing mostly Acumen's money, but as a program officer, you have to make a $10,000 co-investment with your own family's money in order to, and you'll get a good return if it works out. So this is not just someone else's money, but you're going to lose out on a little bit if this deal goes bad.
Making it even harder. Okay, show of hands, who would invest? All right.
What do you normally get in terms of the breakdown?
That's about right. So the rest of you, I'm guessing, would not invest. So someone who raised their hand for investing, why would you invest?
I will invest particularly because I will make that sort of market not only get their own profit growth, but at the same time I get the. You can hear me now.
We can hear you. Maybe use a microphone instead. You don't like it?
No, it's hear your voice. investment. So in case some of the factors that we don't regulate, like climate or any sort of inflection in the market, that family can have options for them to also understand how to use that money in alternative for them to create.
Which family?
The family that I'm investing with in my money. I'm putting my money there.
Okay.
But I want that
your money and Acumen's money.
So if that family is not able to pay me back with the investment because of all the factors that happen, and they say, oh, I don't have a way to pay you, I will say, well, you have options. I will give you this, and with this money, you can pay me back if you create alternative in investing that money in a way that you don't create a loss if something happens.
So it sounds like you want to structure the deal in a way that even if they fail, you still get your money back. It's usually ideal. Anybody else, why would you invest?
You're setting up a
you have,
trend. You're setting up a trend. It's a new trend. They don't have that trend down there.
What do you mean by trend?
Well, coming up with a new maze and new production and all that, they don't have that. So make that transition from the existing to the new one. I don't need it. I already got it. Making the transition from the old to the new is going to set a trend for the rest of that West Africa or East Africa to kind of see where they are at, what they can produce, and follow the trend. Same thing with Google did.
All right. So you believe in the potential, the social impact potential, and you're willing to take all the risks with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the question there is how much do you value social good? So I made it I skewed it by saying it's your money as well, but it was Acumen's money. I mean, remember, Acumen raised money from donors for the purpose of proving that money can be put to work to change and transform how development is delivered. So the purpose of Acumen is not just to get the money back, and which doesn't mean Acumen doesn't focus on getting the money back, but in this investment committee conversation, we have to put value on the social good that is a meaningful and tangible value at the same time that we're going to be looking at the financial returns. And a lot of what you guys talked about were the financial risks. Two things I'd say. If you want to make deals that are much less risky, don't be at Acumen. Be at a place whose purpose is just to make deals that aren't risky. And the other thing I'd say is, and I've said this to Kenyan bankers when I was trying to raise money for our clients, the best way to make sure you don't lose any money is don't make any investments. So, you're never going to have no risk. And if the social good, if the potential social payoff is big enough, that has to be something you value and think in your calculation.
How about some reasons for why you would invest? Or are you guys for investing or not investing? In between, undecided?
Well, I was going to say in this particular case, I would personally not be interested in investing, but even with the risks that are inherent in this particular plan, I think that if you make enough asymmetric bets, you can sort of have a higher risk tolerance, that you can make many of these bets that might be more likely to fail because you only get to strike, be lucky once in order to sort of win out the ball.
Financially or social impact wise?
Both.
Okay. You've been raising your hand a bunch here.
Yeah, one thing I think hasn't been mentioned in why I would invest, I think is the management team. Because you need, in a market that has so much friction involved, you need people who are trustworthy, who, when you're on the ground, you meet the people, there's a long-standing family who's been in the business for such a long time. That's a very important factor in actually investing in the business.
Exactly. Knowing the entrepreneurs and whether they share the same values as Acumen is just as important as the financial sustainability of their idea or the idea in general. Because we want them to be in it for the long haul and for the right reasons. And it's really important. There's right there.
I'm wondering if you could do like a phased approach so that you don't invest all 20,000 right away. You maybe do just the bare minimum to get them started and then have that leverage with existing loans in the area or something like that. And then if it goes well, put more money in as it grows.
So structuring the deal in a way they have to achieve certain milestones before they get their next tranche. So one reason for not investing, and then we'll probably give you the outcome and then have a few minutes for questions.
I think apart from financial projections, there's no measurement for social impact. And given that they're applying to Acumen, they haven't really included any of your measures for social impact. They haven't talked about
how that would scale out, or they haven't prioritized which areas in terms of social impact they want to target, be it lack of education in that area or economic development and so on.
So you want to see who they're actually selling to or targeting.
Right, and what exactly are the benefits? What's their priority area in terms of social impact?
Okay.
So before you give us the final answer, those of you who said you wouldn't invest, how many of you would think this is a good thing if you read in the newspaper that USAID has donated your tax dollars as a grant to this company? So for those of you who said, I don't want to invest because it's financially risky, but I do think this is potentially going to make a big difference socially, if this is not a worthy investment, is it a good use of donor dollars? So same deal where instead of investing going in, it's mostly USAID, and you are writing a $500 personal donation at the end of the year to this company. How many of you think it would be a good donation of those of you said it wouldn't be a good investment?
Good question. So, we did invest. We invested at $2 million. There's little details on how it was structured. It allowed them to purchase the 250 hectares of land and increase their storage facilities. We're still invested. We've also put Global Fellow in place who actually built out that direct sales program that they were talking about. They've been able to produce 3,500 metric tons of seed maize in the 2011-2012 season, which is 3 times production in 2010, which they were looking to improve. And they've served over 300,000 smallholder farmers. And the company is on track to reach that 800,000 that they were looking to reach. That should say RCT. We actually have an RCT randomized controlled trial underway to really assess, are they reaching the smallholder farmers that we're looking to reach, and what does that mean? Is their income increasing, and does it matter? So to understand that social impact. So with you over here, we agreed that if this works, the social impact could be potentially big, and we're willing to take the risks for that. So with that, I'm happy to open it up for questions.
Yeah, so I think so. It's 3:30, so we are going to shut the session down formally and let you guys go. Those of you need to run, I'm available to stay. I think Nessa is as well. And I just want to say that one thing I've noticed in the last few years is this conversation gets more and more sophisticated. 5 years ago, a conversation like this would have not have gotten immediately into the level of nuance you all did. The last thing I'll say is, I have to say this in my new job, which is very much focused on running an impact investing fund, focused on the US. What you just heard about is not something that only applies in poor countries. It's very relevant for the work we do here. Is Donnell here still? Donnell Baird. He's a recent Columbia grad who is creating an impact investing fund that is focused in the US on providing investments that enable communities to put up solar-powered infrastructure that's going to create really good jobs in the US communities that need them and also reduce energy. And the last thing I'll say is if you think there's political risk investing in Kenya, I spent a lot of today trying to figure out which of my borrowers in the US are going to be affected by the fact that we just had a government shutdown. So we don't come into this with any sense of righteousness, but with a great sense of humility about how hard this is to do it everywhere. So thanks, Jessica, and thank you all for